This is Talking Law on Radio 97. Do you have a legal question, a legal problem perhaps, that you would like solved on the radio? Despina will be happy to do that for you. All you need to do is pop it into an email and you can send it to us. The easiest way to do that, go to radio97.com.au. Right up the top, you'll find the contact info there, radio97.com.au.
Thank you, Wayne. So in recent changes to the intestacy laws in WA, it has really sparked some questions. And of course, for Despina, being the lovely lawyer that she is, she thought it would be timely to talk about right now because it seems like Queensland is a little bit behind with these types of laws. So, Despina, can you just recap for us what these intestacy laws kind of look like in Queensland at the moment?
Absolutely. So first of all, for those who don't know that terminology, we use the word intestacy, of course, because that's legal terminology, but it means to die without a will. Okay, so if you die without a will, you don't have a document that sets out who is to receive your estate, and we call it that you die intestate. And then we have rules in legislation, so the Succession Act in Queensland particularly, and there's one in New South Wales, and there are other pieces of legislation similar in other states and territories around Australia that dictate what happens if someone dies intestate, that is, to die without a will, who gets their estate. And there are laws that says who receives it and in what proportions. So in WA, there was a recent change to the legislation after 4 decades.
Oh.
So exactly, it's interesting because in Queensland, for example, the Succession Act was brought out in 1981. Mm-hmm. And there have been some changes over the years, not too many. Mm-hmm. And in WA, they made some changes after 4 decades. So previously in WA, the rules were that if you died without a will and you left a spouse, that spouse would receive $50,000.
Yeah, which these days
which
isn't
not
worth
a lot
much.
of
not much.
Exactly,
No.
exactly. And they bumped that up to $472,000 recently if someone died, left a partner with children. Okay, and then they also changed it in WA where someone died, left a partner but no children. Then it was increased from $75,000, you can imagine that, very small amount, to $705,000 now.
What a jump.
So a big change. And that reflects the current market values and the growth that we've seen definitely over the last 4 decades, as you can imagine. And then when I read this recently, I thought, you know what, we haven't had changes to the values in the Succession Act in Queensland for some time. Maybe it's time for someone to be reviewing this, and maybe they currently are. I don't know. I'm not aware of that, but I thought I'd mention, first of all, what happens in Queensland when you die without a will, what are the values, who gets what, and I thought it was just interesting anyway to talk about and dispel the myth that, oh, if I die without a will, the public trustee gets everything. Well,
yeah, a lot of people think
no,
that, yeah.
That's right. And a lot of people think that, not necessarily. The public trustee would really only come into it if you actually died and left absolutely no related members or any remote family members at all. And we'll go through the order so people understand. So in Queensland, in the Succession Act, okay, if you die without a will, so you die intestate, and try not to get too technical, but basically if you die and you leave a spouse, no children at all, then the spouse gets the whole of the residue of the estate. Okay, that's fine. If you die and you leave a spouse and children, okay, and so that spouse only gets this. They get $150,000 and the household chattels, and they get to share in the residue with the children that are left, and depending on how many children are left. So if there's only one child, then the spouse will get half of that. 2 or more children, then the spouse will only get a third of the residue plus $150,000 and the household chattels. So when you think about it, it doesn't seem to be a lot, does it?
Not at all, especially if you have a $2 million property and God knows what else. So in WA, it'd be about 5,000.
That's right, with children left. So this might actually avoid a lot of claims that are made by spouses and partners that are left. You see, and a person dies without a will, they're left, because the rules have reflecting these types of values and have been since 1981 pretty much. So really, they probably should be reviewed quite considerably, and it might actually avoid then claims made in the courts, because spouses, you can imagine, if the estate's quite valuable, they're going, oh, well, I only get $150,000 and a half or maybe only a third of the residue. What's the residue? What's left? Depending on the value. So it's interesting, isn't it? And I think perhaps the Queensland government should be looking at reviewing the Succession Act for that reason. But let's also talk about the order of who gets what.
Yeah, who's first in line?
Who's first in line, yeah.
Yes, I thought that would be interesting for people to know. And this is Queensland, not New South Wales. So we'll just clarify that. Maybe people want me to talk about New South Wales next week. I can do that. So in Queensland, so if we go through it, so obviously we've talked about if there's a spouse left, and spouses do include de facto spouses, sometimes former spouses, depending if they're still dependents, and same-sex relationships or civil partnerships. So it does include all of those types of partners. So we've talked about if a partner or spouse is left with children and what happens there. So the next order, if there's no surviving spouse and no children or children of that child, so say grandchildren. So you're looking at parents of the deceased person, okay? And obviously, if there's both two parents, then they share equally, or if there's one parent, they receive. If there are no parents at all and you've got no surviving spouse and you've got no children or children of those children, so if you had a child and they died before you but they left children, okay, so grandchildren. So if you don't have any of those, then it goes to brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
Okay. And then after that, if there are no brothers and sisters, the next order is nieces and nephews.
Wow, okay.
Okay.
Yep.
And then after that, the next order would be grandparents. Okay. And after that, the next order is aunts and uncles. So this is all relative to the deceased person, remember? So that's quite an extensive family range,
We're
isn't
pushing
it?
further and further out, yeah.
No cousins, though, Despina. The cousins lose out.
Exactly.
Rats. That's so interesting, yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? So as I said earlier, for it to go to the Crown, as we call it, public trustee, you'd really have to die without any remote family members of any kind. And look, sometimes it does happen. You know, sometimes you die, you've never had children.
Yeah,
so you obviously don't have grandchildren.
And if you come from a small family, yeah.
That's right. So sometimes it does happen on the rare occasion. And in that case, it would go to the Crown, yes. But as I said, you'd really have to bypass obviously all of those next of kin that are listed in the Succession Act in Queensland. So, yeah, I thought listeners might find that informative this morning. But of course, if you don't want any of these intestacy rules to apply to you and you don't like the sound of this, then the best thing to do is to go see a solicitor today and make that will. That's probably well overdue. So go and do that today to make sure that you can decide exactly how your estate is distributed.
Yeah, and interesting stuff. Well, thank you so much again, Despina Priala, for coming on the show for Talking Law. If anyone does want to get in touch with you directly, where can they go?
So they can phone the office 55291 294, or they can email us at info@prialalegal.com.au. And then if anyone's missed the segment or only caught the end of this today, it'll be uploaded on YouTube on the weekend.
Yeah, simply search Priala Legal, Priala. Thanks again, Despina and Wayne.
And we'll be back same time next week.
Great. See you then, guys.
See you then.